Hello, my name is Benji and welcome to Dice vs Cards. Today we visit once again Arkham Horror the card game. Last week we brought you the Seeker Toolkit, aka every worthwhile yellow bordered card you could ever want to include in your deck. But today we're going to talk about the Seekers themselves. We won't necessarily be ranking them, but we'll certainly be giving them a rating for both solo and multiplayer. This week's episode is going to focus on the first three out of the blocks: Daisy Walker, Rex Murphy and Minh Fun. As I look back at the core set investigators, fondness often abides, and with Daisy Walker things are no different. A prototypical clue gatherer, just what you'd expect from a typical seeker, and excelling at that task like few others. A bookworm at heart, though favouring intellectual pursuits over bashing uglies in the face, you definitely need to focus on what she's good at. Looking at her stat line, you see someone that definitely has a yin-yang vibe going on. Having a native skill of 5 in any category means you're at the +2 sweet spot for skill checks on standard difficulty, without having to ask for any support. But when that stat is intellect, the primary enabler for you to gather clues, you should have a pretty good idea what you're going to be spending your game doing. Her respectable willpower and high sanity will see you holding your own against the encounter deck, especially with access to mystic cards, but any physical threat will be met with a gasp of, "Oh crap, what do I do now?" Her signature ability is situationally broken, providing we can A. fetch a good tome, and B. do something impactful most if not every turn with said book. Cards like Encyclopedia are a no-brainer for this slot, whilst Old Book of Lore is only really useful in a Daisy deck. You can also cheat an Archaic Glyph in at the start of the campaign, but just remember that this will upgrade to a spell once translated. Daisy's signature card, representing her tote bag, really underwhelms. 2 extra slots just for tomes is way too much for a seeker that's rarely desperate for extra hand slots in the first place. Yes, it synergises with her ability, but in this instance, for the resource cost of 2, you're just not getting enough return on your investment. Just use it for a skill test and be done with it. That advice factors in instances where you draw her weakness, the Necronomicon. It takes up a hand slot and it's a tome, so if you need the slot, just get rid of it. Daisy has a welcome 9 sanity up in her noggin, but if you don't need the slot, just deal with it as and when you can. Her off-class deck building choice of mystic cards are what make her slightly more flexible in terms of what she brings to the table than you might expect. Cards like Holy Rosary and Shriveling will allow her to stand more on her own 2 feet, and Ward of Protection and Scrying give you a buffer between you and the really bad shizzle going down. With all that said, there's a reason Daisy is so well thought of as an investigator. She gives you out-of-the-box clue-gathering goodness at the cost of being unable to realistically or consistently deal with corporeal enemies. All this goes to say that no matter how hard you try, you're not going to be standing alone too often with Ms. Walker. Warranting a D for when you're getting to the table solo, she just doesn't bring enough self-defense and certainly doesn't bring enough health to keep her alive long enough to do what she does. Multiplayer on the other hand is where she excels, only needing one dance partner to help distract those big baddies, enough to earn a glowing A for her support-like playstyle. With the Dunnage legacy came the little reporter that could, Rex Murphy. Another typical seeker, Rex takes a go big or go home approach to clue gathering, gobbling up clues in bulk when you go full commitment to an investigate test. King Murph is a little bit sturdier on his feet than Daisy before him, but still sticks to a seeker's strengths for the most part. His stat line is almost identical to that of Ms. Walker's, sacrificing just 1 intellect and gaining an agility in the process, making him that teensy bit more able to evade enemies, but needing a little bit of a boost to get his Johnny consistent clue gathering going on. Thank the pipes then for how easy it is for a seeker to get at least +1 to their intellect. Again, the 3 willpower can often be enough to get investigators out of trouble with the encounter deck, and the less said about the 2 combat the better. If you struggle to kill a swarm of rats, then probably best to let someone else do the murdering. His signature ability, as I've already alluded to, is pretty gosh darn great, but still needs some support to make it sing the highest notes. As such, intellect boosting staples like Dr. Christopher Milan and magnifying glass are even more of an auto-include, and higher education is preferable to something like hyper-awareness, unless you're totally averse to building around card draw and keeping cards in your hand. Back on point, his ability was deemed too good, especially in multiplayer, and so was tabooed to be a once per turn triggered ability. A considerable nerf when all's said and done, and that might influence your deck building, when all of a sudden skill icon boosts potentially become more economical than the cards I've just mentioned. Rex's signature card, Search for the Truth, is wonderfully synergistic with higher education, and so for that build it's a card that you'll be extremely glad to be drawing, so long as you're the primary clue gatherer, and there are plenty of clues to go about. See previous comments about more players equals more clues. If you find yourself clueless, the skill icons on board are also sexy as hell. Rex's weakness, or more specifically curse, can be a right pain in the arse, especially if you draw it multiple times in a game, which is on the probably side of likely. Don't get me wrong, it's not the end of the world when you have to work around it, but it can really hurt your tempo and often feels like a double whammy, encouraging you to draw failure from success. His off-class deck building options are the sort of sandbox, pick what you want from any level 0 card that you're more than happy to see on the back of an investigator. The problem is that this availability of choice benefits more all-round investigators, allowing them to tweak their game plan and deck to a preferred playstyle. But that's not to say that this amount of choice is not welcome on Rexus. Cards like Dodge, Burglary, Open Gate and Scavenging all do a job, but there are absolutely loads of potential candidates out there to improve your deck. All that's left to say is that Rex doesn't deviate too far from the norm this early in the design cycle of the game. His off-class choices are a nice touch, but the taboo nerf to his signature ability is a bitter pill to swallow if you're playing with those amendments. Nonetheless, this is a guy that sadly doesn't fare that much better in solo than Daisy, but whose slightly increased ability to evade means he warrants a C for solo play. But it's a similar story again because multiplayer is where he excels, comfortably earning an A. Although with taboo that's definitely flirting with a B. Put simply, the more clues up for grabs, the better his particular set of skills come to the fore, and the better he is as an investigator. Our last investigator is Minh Phan, the skill icon obsessed company secretary with a gleefully symmetrical set of stats. She is once again a support first seeker, and we'll come on to the reasons why that is in a moment, but whereas most investigators welcome a good skill boost or two, the extra boost whenever she commits a card to a skill test opens up some ancillary benefits in the deck building space. Her stat line, as I've already mentioned, very clearly indicates that she can look after herself in the clue gathering and the "okay Bob, what does the encounter deck have in store for me" next columns, but is effectively saying, okay, I need some help when it comes to mangling minions. What I find heartening about all this is that she has an even 7 and 7 health and sanity, giving her some native all-round durability, but also a delightful 4 willpower that will mean she can competently hold her own against the encounter deck and any separate willpower tests. Her signature ability seems fairly lightweight at first glance, a free wild icon, but I have to admit a card in the first place isn't exactly game breaking, and it would on the face of things concern me the need to take valuable deck slots up with potent skill cards, leaving you very much at the mercy of those found on the assets and events you've built your deck around. But, and there is a big but attached to this, her signature card, Analytical Mind, may as well have been entitled "Be Free, Minh, Spread Your Wings and Fly." My god, is this an impactful signature card and one of the best support cards in the game. Thankfully it has a once per turn spend a card, draw a card mechanism, otherwise you'd be left with a handful of nothing abusing this ability. What's for sure though is she loves those card drawing neutral skills as well. What it does do though is pigeonhole you quite firmly into a support role. Still, take solace in the love and adoration your fellow players will be wafting your way. Her weakness, the king in yellow, looks a little bit scary, but in actuality ties into her strategy, making sure you emphasise card draw in your deck construction and committing big to a particularly difficult skill test. The only downside being, with all this card draw, you'll be seeing this colourful card more than you might have hoped for. Her off-class choice of survivor cards makes for some interesting interactions with skill tests, because a common theme that runs through the red bordered cards is the ability to make a failed skill test a good thing. Clearly not something Miss Phan is fond of, but there are also some survivor cards out there like Glimmer of Hope, Sharp Vision and Scavenging that perfectly support what she's trying to do, be it reusing skill icons or playing stuff from your bin. Both are a welcome way of achieving more efficiency from discarded cards. So all that's left to say is that despite Minh being a fairly typical seeker on the surface, there is actually a great deal to appreciate about the way she approaches her supporting role. Still, a supporting role still means that her first choice of player count would rarely be one. Her access to survivor cards and her strong start in health and sanity somewhat mitigate that, but nowhere enough to give her more than a C for solo play. But as has now become a bit of a theme with these early seekers, she comfortably deserves an A in multiplayer. Just make sure you find a way to dig for that analytical mind and ensure it hits the table early. So there you have it, your choice of the first 3 seekers released. Now there's no excuse not to get creative and take your favourite investigator for a spin. Stay tuned next week for part 2, but for now I hope you found this helpful and I'll see you next time.